Hey everyone, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Samachay, Daf 65 of Masechta Pesachim. Today we finish which perek do we finish? The 5th perek, and we start the 6th perek. How many perakim are there? I think there are 10 perakim in Pesachim. So we're really moving along over here on Masechta Pesachim. We're more than halfway through, really pretty much right in the middle section of Masechta Pesachim, so that's exciting stuff. We will discuss washing the azara on Shabbos Erev Pesach. Okay, that's what we're going to discuss. Also, when they would plug up the azara so that all of the blood would accumulate over there, we're going to see that a little bit. And then we start our new perek, the sixth perek, and we're going to discuss more details of offering the Korban Pesach when Erev Shabbos is on, when Erev Pesach is on Shabbos. Let us begin on Daf Samachay. 2 lines from the top. Yotzasa Kas Rishon V'chulei. So the Mishnah says that when the first group is done offering the Korban Pesach, so then the second group would come in. Tani Yinikres Kasatzlonis. Interesting. So we learn in a brayse that this last final group was called a lazy group. The Gemara says, what did they do wrong? Why do you have to put them down? Why do you have to call them the lazy group? Someone's going to have to be in the third group. After all, there have to be 3 groups, so someone's going to have to be in the last one. So what should they have done? It was inevitable. But even so, they should have been, more, excited, more, assertive, that they should have made sure to be in the first group, right? Don't be of those who, are gonna be the type that would end up in the last group. If you want, you could be in the first group. If you cared, you could be in the first group. Now, Kedetanya, or I wouldn't even say it like that, but let's see. Kedetanya is within the Brayse. Rabbi Omer says, Rabbi, Yef Shalom B'lo Basam Uv'lo Borsi Asher Mishum Noso Basam Oilo Mishum Noso Borsi. Look, at the end of the day, someone's going to have to be a perfume maker and someone's going to have to be a tanner. Better to be the perfume maker than to be the tanner. Yef Shalom B'lo Zcharim V'lo Nekevos Asher Mishabanim Zcharim Oilo Mishabanim Nekevos. Well, the Gemara also says that the world has to have men and the world has to have women. Better that your children should be boys than that they should be girls. Alright, okay. Sounds good. Well, okay. Anyways, so it's interesting conceptually, right? That the way the world works, pieces are going to have to fall into place one way or another. But, let's just at least focus on the first metaphor, but someone's gonna have to be the perfume maker, someone's gonna have to be the tanner. May as well kind of try to organize your cards as best as you can to try to be the perfume maker, not the tanner. Very interesting. We see things like this come up from time to time also, right? There's the halacha of the ma'akeh, right? Put up a fence around your roof so that nobody falls off your roof, right? And, the Medrash says that this person was destined to fall off a roof anyways. He did something wrong, whatever it is. He had to be a person who's going to fall off of a roof. But still, it doesn't have to be your roof. There's it's interesting to think about trying to put yourself in a position where you can kind of, benefit, or whatever, be able to have a better reality. Fine. So in the same way that they would do the Korban Pesach during the week, they would also do the Korban Pesach on Shabbos. The only difference is that on Shabbos they would wash the floors, but when they washed the floors, the rabbis were not excited about that. They were not happy that they were washing the floors. Now, Shelo B'Ratzon Man, who is this rabbis who were not excited that they were washing the floors? Which is also interesting, because the Chachamim in general, who are these Chachamim? it's such a moving target. And it's like this general vague chachamim people group. Is it a group? Is it a person? What is it? And the thing is, I think it could be, first of all, I think the chachamim are relative. So when it comes to, let's say, a machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and the chachamim, I think the chachamim would be Rabbi Yoshua. If it's like machlokas between Rabbi Yossi and the chachamim, I think the chachamim could be Reb Meir, Reb Shimon, Reb Yehuda, Ki'ilu. It depends what generation you are. If it's Rabbi Kiva, maybe it's Rabbi Shmuel. So I think, Chacham is relative in that sense, that it depends who we're talking about and who he would be arguing with. But also sometimes Chacham can even just be one person, as we're going to see right now. Right? Shelo b'tzon man. When we say that they would wash the floors of the azara in the context of the Korban Pesach when it was on Shabbos, and it wasn't like the Chachamim, so who is this Chacham that it wasn't like? Amr Chizda shelo b'tzon Rabbi Eliezer. It's not like Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer wasn't into it. The Rabbanon ha'amri shvusu ve'en shvus b'mikdash. Well, because I guess if it would be the rabbis who argue on Rabbi Eliezer, well then they say that washing, that sweeping at least, and we're comparing washing the floor of the azara to sweeping, would only be a shvus, and ein shvus b'mikdash, would only be also mid'Rabbanan. And we know that the Rabbanans in the Beis HaMikdash are waived in the context of doing the avoda, as we saw in depth at the end of Masechta Eruvin. Maihi, what's this machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, where Rabbi Eliezer says that you're not allowed to, or from which we understand that Rabbi Eliezer would say that you're not allowed to wash the azara. The Tanya is, we learn in the Brisa, echad acholev ve'echad mechabetz ve'amegabein kigrogris. If you have somebody who milks or kind of makes curds of cheese, or curds of milk, ve'amegabein, and somebody makes cheese, kigrogris. Of course, we know from Masechta Shabbos that the size of a dried fig is the default amount when it comes to foods. On Shabbos, hamachabed v'amirabetz v'arode chalos tvash b'shogeg b'Shabbos, and somebody who sweeps the floor or pours some water on the floor to keep down the dust, or somebody who takes down honeycombs by accident b'Shabbos, right? All these things are talking about by accident. Chayav chatas, he's going to be chayav a korban chatas. Hezid b'yom tiv lokas arboim, and if it wasn't Shabbos, if it was Yom Tiv, and he did these things on purpose, well then we will whip him. Tiv Rabbi Eliezer, that is Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. The Chacham say echad zeh ve'echad zeh einu ela mishum shvus. That these things, now this isn't talking about milking and making cheese, because those are, I think, tolados. But sweeping and keeping down the dust with water and taking down honeycombs, so the Chacham say that would only be a shvus. So we see that we have a machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim regarding sweeping, if that would be considered also midoraisa, like Rabbi Eliezer says, or only also midorabanan, like the Chachamim say. And therefore, since Rabbi Eliezer says that sweeping is also midoraisa, and we're comparing washing the floor of the azara to sweeping, so therefore, it wouldn't be allowed to be done in the Beis HaMikdash according to Rabbi Eliezer. But according to the Chacham, it's only also midrabanan and ain't shvus b'mikdash, and you would be allowed to, theoretically, you should be allowed to wash the floor according to Chachamim in the Beis HaMikdash on Shabbos. Rav Ashi Omer says, Rav Ashi afilu tema shelo b'tzon Chachamim. Rav Ashi says, no, you can even say that the Chachamim would not be into washing the floor of the azara on Shabbos, because Reb Nosani, it's like Reb Nosan. The Tanya Reb Nosan Omer shvus tzricha itiru shvus shena tzricha lo itiru. That Reb Nosan says that even in the Beis HaMikdash, when we say that they were allowed to do dirabanan in shvus b'mikdash, when we say that isurei dirabanan do not apply in the Beis HaMikdash, that's specifically within the context of doing the avoda. In this case, the avoda was already done, right? This is after the fact. It's after you slaughtered a whole bunch of sheep that you want to wash the floor. But at that point, it's no longer in the context of avoda, so therefore, even the Chacham, who say it's a shvus, would say that you would not be allowed to wash the floor of the azara, because it's no longer in the context of the avoda. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kosei Memale v'chulei. So Rabbi Yehuda had this interesting opinion, which is that you take a cup full of all the collective blood that gathered on the floor of the azara during the shechting of the Korban Pesach. You take this cup and, at least symbolically, it would, but I guess technically we're saying more than symbolically, but this blood that you scoop up into this cup from all of the sheep that were slaughtered over there will contain some blood from all of the sheep that were slaughtered, and therefore even if you had one sheep that all of its blood fell on the floor, well, by taking this cupful of blood, you will have at least some of the blood of that sheep in this cup, and when you throw this collective blood on the Mizbeach, you will, be motzi all of the Korban Pesachs for Zrikas Dam, even if the blood of a particular one fell on the floor. Okay? Tanya, we learn in the Brayso, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, says Rabbi Yehuda, Kosai Memale Midam Ruvos, that says Rabbi Yehuda, they would fill up a cup with all of the collective blood, Shem Yishafech Damo Shel Echad Me'en, so that if the blood of one of the Korban Pesachs fell on the floor, Nimtza Zemach Shiro, so by taking this cup full of all the blood and throwing it on the Mizbeach, well then it will be kosher. Right? That Korban Pesach whose blood fell on the floor will now be kosher. Amlo Rabbi Yehuda, they said to Rabbi Yehuda, Valolo Niskaba B'chli. So yeah, but in order for Zrikas Adam to work, the blood will have had to have been received in a vessel, right? Meaning, of course, as we know by now, there's the shchita of the Korban Pesach, but then there's the Kabbalah Sadam, that, putting the, some kind of a receptacle opposite the neck of the animal to receive all the blood, and then you bring it to the Mizbeach, and then you throw it on the Mizbeach. So the Chacham said to Rabbi Yehuda, while taking a cupful of blood from the collective blood of all the animals may contain some of the blood of that animal that fell on whose blood fell on the floor, but there was no Kabbalah in a Klei Sharis. There was no Kabbalah Sadam. So the Gemara says, well, how did they know that there was no Kabbalah Sadam? Maybe the blood was into the receptacle, and then the receptacle fell on the floor, and we lost the blood. This is what they were saying to Rabbi Yehuda, Shema lo niskabel bichli. Maybe there was no Kabbalah Sadam. Okay, fine. So he says to them, Afani lo amarti ala b'niskabel bichli. So says Rabbi Yehuda to them, yeah, you're right. I'm only talking about this collective blood working for Korban Pesachs, whose blood was initially received in a Klei Sharis, and then fell on the floor. Mino Yada. Well, how does Rabbi Yehuda know if the blood of this particular Korban Pesach that is now collectively being gathered into this cup was received in a Klei Sharis? So Kohanim is reasoning. So the Gemara says, well, because Kohanim are very meticulous, and therefore they're going to be sure that the blood was received properly in a Kli. But he's reasoning, Amay Mishtapech. But the Gemara says, yeah, but if they're so meticulous, then why did blood spill onto the floor? Well, because they're so meticulous, they're overly meticulous, that somehow, I guess they were, so involved in what they were doing that somehow they lost grip of it. Okay, I don't know. I guess they were so excited and there was so much going on that somehow even after they received the blood in the Klei Sharis, it somehow slipped out of their hands and fell on the floor. Okay. But Valodam Atamtis Morabo, but Rabbi Yehuda. Next question. The blood that we throw on the Mizbeach is the Dam HaNefesh, right? And we've seen this before somewhere. I can't remember where, but that there is the blood that when you shech the animal, it's like the initial blood that kind of squirts out, and that is how the animal dies. But then there's once the animal's already dead, there's blood in the neck that can kind of still come out, and that's what's called damatamtsis. So now, on the floor of the azara, there's going to be all sorts of bloods. Sure, there's going to be dama nefesh, but there's also going to be damatamtsis, this blood that, the animal was already dead and it was just kind of dripping onto the floor. And as Rashi says, that's probably going to be most of what the blood on the floor is this damatamtsis. And therefore, even if you have this, one korban whose blood fell on the floor, it's going to be batel in the pool of damatamtsis. And therefore, even if you take a cupful of this blood, mistama, it's really has to be just treated as damatamtsis, as this blood that you wouldn't throw on the Mizbeach. and therefore even by taking a cupful of all the cumulative blood on the floor of the azara, that shouldn't really matter. It shouldn't make a difference. So Rabbi Yehuda l'tami dama tamtzis dama alyu. So the Gemara says, well, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is that dama tamtzis is just good, geschmacke, regular blood. The Tanya, as we learned in the Brisa, dama tamtzis ba'azara, that if you consume dama tamtzis, it's a lav. Rabbi Yehuda omer bi kares. Rabbi Yehuda says you say kares, right? Because what does the pasuk say? It says ki nefesh kol basar damo hi kol ochla vi kares. That anybody who eats blood gets kares. So, and Tanakama says that does not apply to dama tamtzis. That this blood that kind of just lingers in the neck after the animal's already dead, if you consume that, you will not be chayiv kares. So Rabbi Yehuda says, sure you will, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda treats dama tamtzis the same way as he treats other blood. And therefore he doesn't care that there's going to be a lot of dama tamtzis on the floor of the azara and subsequently in your cup. But one second, Rabbi Elazar says that Rabbi Yehuda admits that even though you will be chayiv kares for eating dama tamtzis cannot be thrown on the mizbeach as a kapara. So when it comes to zrikas adam, still Rabbi Yehuda says that you would not be able to include dama tamtzis in the zrikas adam. So again, how can you just be filling up a cup of blood and assume that that's going to work for the zrikas adam? There's going to be plenty of dama tamtzis in there. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, ki adamu b'nefesh yichaper, that it is the blood that b'nefesh yichaper, that in the soul will have a kapara. Dam shanefesh yotza bo mechaper, blood which the animal dies from, that's a kapara. So kilu, the animal's alive, slit the throat, and then you take that first blood as the animal's dying, all the blood that you're draining from the animal that's causing the death of the animal, that is what you throw onto the mizbeach as a kapara. Dam she'ena nefesh yotza bo einu mechaper. But once the animal's dead and now you have lingering residual blood in the neck, well then that is not going to be what you throw on the mizbeach, and therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, when you fill up a cup of the blood, there's going to be plenty of dama tamtzis in there, and that doesn't go on the mizbeach. So Rabbi Yehuda l'tami d'amrein dam mevatel dam. So Rabbi Yehuda is in line with his reasoning that his opinion is that blood cannot nullify other blood, and therefore, even though yes, there'll be plenty of dama tamtzis in there, but as long as there is some of this blood from this animal whose blood fell on the floor, so that would be enough to be thrown on the mizbeach, any amount of it. And the fact that there's this dama tamtzis, blood doesn't interfere with other blood, and therefore that would not be a problem. Okay, so that's Rabbi Yehuda's suggestion. Take a cup full of blood just from the floor, and as we're going to see in a minute, that there was no shortage of blood pooled up on the floor. So just fill up a cup, throw it on the mizbeach, and if any blood had fallen on the floor from some korban pesach, it will now be considered to be thrown on the mizbeach. Tanya, we learn in a brisa. We learn Rabbi Yehuda l'chacham. Rabbi Yehuda said to the chachamim, "L'divreichem lama pokin es azara." Very interesting. Okay, so I don't understand exactly the architecture of like this thing, but basically in the azara there was this stream that would go. It would like kind of flow through the azara, and the blood on the floor of the azara from all the korbanos that they would slaughter, you would kind of like sponge it, I guess, or somehow get it into this stream, and then the stream would bring it out of the azara, and that's how they would keep things clean. So we saw earlier how they would plug up this stream so that the water would overflow and kind of wash away all the blood. But I guess also they would somehow be able to plug up the blood so that it didn't get into the stream, so that it can accumulate in like a pool in the azara. So Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda l'chacham. So Rabbi Yehuda said to the chachamim, "L'divreichem." So according to you, that you don't take a cup and fill it up of all the cumulative blood. Lama pokakin es azara. So how come you plug up the azara so that the blood doesn't go out to the stream? Amulo shevachu levnei aharon sheyelchu ad arkuboseim badam. Very interesting response. So Rabbi Yehuda says, look, I understand why they plug up the hole so that the blood doesn't leave, because we want there to be enough blood on the floor so you could take a cup full of it. the Chacham say, no, it's not so you could take a cup full of it. It's because it's the shevach of the Kohanim that they should be mamish, like wading through like a pool of blood. Like it's very mechubad that, so much korbanos going on and so much happening in the azara that there's so much blood pooled up that they mamish have to like wade through the blood. And that would be like mamish mechubad. Interesting. Praiseworthy. V'ha kachayitz. So the Gemara says, okay, that sounds nice, but still, it's a chatzitza. As we learned at the end of Masechta Eruvin, you can't have a chatzitza when you're doing the avoda, right? So therefore, if there's going to be blood on the floor, when the Kohanim are stepping on the floor, they're not, right? There's blood between them and the floor. So lachu ve'enu chotzitz. So the Gemara says, well, the blood is moist, and moist things don't make a chatzitza. Kedetanya, as we learn in the Brayso, Adam v'adio v'achalav v'advash yiveshim chotzitzin lachin and ein chotzitzin. So we learn in the Brayso that when it comes to going to the mikveh, so when you go to the mikveh, so you can't have a chatzitza, you can't have anything between your skin and the waters. So what if you have blood on your skin? V'adio, or ink, v'achalav, or milk, v'advash, or honey. So yiveshim chotzitzin, if they're dry, so then it's a chatzitza, but lachin ein chotzitzin. But if it's moist, it doesn't make a chatzitza. So the fact that there's blood on the floor won't be an issue of chatzitza. But their clothing is going to get dirty. And the Kohanim are not allowed to do the avodah in the Beis HaMikdash with dirty clothing. V'tanya, as we learn in the Brayso, if you have a fellow whose clothing was stained and was dirty, and he did the avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, his avodah is pasul. So you can't have dirty clothing. So how can you have Kohanim wading around in pools of blood? Obviously, their clothing is going to get bloody. And if you're going to suggest, well, they just kind of lift up their pants. But we learn in the Brayso, midovad, that, you're going to make these. What, is this by the Mikhnasayim? Yeah, it looks like it. So the pants that the Kohen would wear, that they were mido bad. What does that mean? It was mido k'midaso, that his measurement of cloth, meaning they would make shaliyachsa v'lo yosir, that they would fit the clothing of the Kohanim to be fit perfectly. That it shouldn't be too long or shouldn't be too short. So we see that we don't want the Kohen, that we're particular about the measurements of the clothing of the Kohanim, that it should be just to the floor, not longer, not shorter. So don't be lifting up your clothing. So So the Gemara suggests, interestingly, okay, so maybe they were only suggesting that they're going to lift up their pants by when they bring the limbs to the Mizbeach, because that technically isn't an avoda. Let's go weiter. Vilo is taking things to the taking the limbs to the Mizbeach, not an avoda. Veha midabai kahuna, from the fact that we need Kohanim to do it, avoda, it must be an avoda. The Tanya is we learn in the Brayso, v'ikriv hakohen es kol ha-mizbecha, that the Kohen will bring everything to the Mizbeach. Zo'alacha zivarim lakavesh. This is bringing the limbs of the animals to the ramp of the Mizbeach. Ela bolachas eitzim l'maracha. So then the Gemara suggests, okay, so maybe we're suggesting that they can lift up their pants when they bring the wood to the fire of the Mizbeach to be burnt. The lav avodahi, that isn't technically an avoda, so they could lift up their pants, but nonetheless, for the Gemara, fine, so then great, so they could technically lift up their pants when they're bringing the wood to the Mizbeach, but still, but still, one second, bigger picture kind of thing. We're saying that there was tons of blood in azara, that they would have to wade through it, but then that means that their clothing is going to get dirty. How can you have your clothing dirty? So you said, well, I don't know, it doesn't, wait, so then we said, okay, well, you can lift up the pants. But what do you mean? The pants have to be the proper size. You can't lift it up. So then we suggest, okay, but maybe just lift up your pants when you're taking wood to the Mizbeach. I was like, okay, great, that sounds fine, but that doesn't help us in terms of like, what about what we described yesterday, that the Kohanim would receive all the blood in these kalim and then they would bring it to the Mizbeach and stuff like that. Their clothes are going to be getting bloody during that, and that's the avoda. You can't have dirty clothing, and you also can't lift up your pants because it has to be the right size. So the Gemara answers, the Maskei Itztebe. Very interesting. But the Kohanim, there would be like different platforms there. So yeah, you'd have like pools of blood on the floor. And there would be platforms that the Kohanim would be standing on so that they wouldn't have to be getting dirty in the blood. Wow. Very, very interesting scene over there. Says the Gemara, what really says the Mishnah, Ketzatolun mafshitin v'chulei karu ve'otziu emurav nesanim b'magis v'ektiran. So, right, they would like flay the animal, remove like its skin and things like that, and then they would tear it open with a knife and take out its guts and all sorts of nice stuff. And then they would put it on a plate, like the fats and stuff that they're going to put on the mizbeach. They would put on a plate and put on the mizbeach. So the Gemara says, one second, was the Yisrael, the non-Kohen who was offering his Korban Pesach, he himself would put these things on the mizbeach? What do you mean? That's like a Kohen kind of thing. So emot leaktiron agam mizbeach. No, leaktiron. So meaning you put the fats that are going to go on the mizbeach onto this plate so that they will then be burnt on the mizbeach by the Kohen. Yotzes hakas rishona v'chulei. So we said that then if it was Shabbos, then after they were done bringing their Korban Pesach, the first group would go out to like the Har Abayis, to the Temple Mount, and then the second group would go into the Chel, the third group would kind of stay where they are. Tana kol echad ve'echad nosin pischo be'oro umafshil la'achorav amar v'ilish tayos. Interesting. So the Gemara says that everybody would take their Korban Pesach and wrap it in its skin. So they would already strip the hide from the Korban Pesach, and then they would take the meat and they would kind of basically make some kind of like satchel with the skin, the hide of the Korban Pesach, and they would put the meat and stuff in the hide, and they would throw that over their shoulder, and that's how they would transfer it back to their homes. And says Rav Elish Tayos, says Rav Elish, like the Arab merchants would do. Interesting. Hajan Olach Tamid Nishchat, we will come back to you. The afternoon offering is slaughtered. Interesting. Now we begin the next perek, the 6th perek of Masechta Pesachim. Elu Dvarim bePesach Dochenes HaShabbos. The following steps in offering the Korban Pesach override or really push off Shabbos, that even though it's Shabbos you can do them. Shchitaso, slaughtering the Korban Pesach, Uzvikas Damo, throwing its blood on the Mizbeach. Umichui Kravav. I think that is like getting rid of all the excrement from its intestines, because if you don't do that on Shabbos, it's going to create a mess. Sounds like either way it's going to create a mess. Vaktaras Chelvav, and burning its fats. Aval Tzliyasav Adachas Kravav, Ein Dochenes HaShabbos. But roasting it and rinsing, washing the outside of its intestines, that is not Docha Shabbos. You can do that after Shabbos. And because you can do it after Shabbos, don't do it on Shabbos. Now, taking the live Korban Pesach, throwing it over your shoulder, right? Meaning throwing it over your shoulder and then walking through Rosh Hashanah to get to the Beis Hamikdash, or bringing it from outside of Tchum Shabbos, and removing its wart. Do you guys remember that? That was at the end of Masechta Pesachim. That was Eruvin. That was a very difficult daf. Very, very difficult daf. Whether you're using it bechli or biyad. What was it? Machlokas or Chanina? And, I don't know. Probably Rabbi Elazar. But they didn't say who was who. That was very complicated stuff. Anyway, so throwing it over your shoulder and walking it through Rosh Hashanah and bringing it from outside of Tchum Shabbos, and removing its warts, Ein Dochenes HaShabbos, they do not override Shabbos. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Dochin, Rabbi Eliezer says that they do override Shabbos. Omer Rabbi Eliezer, so Rabbi Eliezer then argued, Valo Dinu. It's logical to say that things like removing its warts and bringing it from outside of Tchum Shabbos would be Docha Shabbos. Ma'im Shchita shi mishum milacha Doches HaShabbos. Well, because if Shchita, which is mamash and av milacha, as we know from Masechta Shabbos, and nonetheless you're allowed to do the shechita of the Korban Pesach, which is an Issur D'Oraisa, but you would be allowed to do it. Elu shein mishum shvus, these things, removing its wart, which I guess maybe you're doing it, if you're doing it biyad, so then it's not in its normal way. And I think that was kind of like part of the argument in Masechta Eruvin about, in order for it to be a shvus, it would have to be biyad, not bekli. Anyways, or bring it from outside Tchum Shabbos, assuming that Tchum Shabbos is D'Rabbanan. And then we said, Rashi even explained that bringing it in the Rishus Harabim also would be Midrabanan, because, why was it Midrabanan? Right, because of course the concept that we know from Masechta Shabbos, Chayno Seyas Atzmo, that something that's alive carries itself. So therefore, even though you're carrying this sheep through Rishus Harabim, since it's alive, it's technically only also Midrabanan. So all these things are Midrabanan, so Lo Yidchu Es HaShabbos, and certainly they should be Doche Shabbos. That's Rabbi Eliezer's argument. Amalei Rabbi Yoshua. So Rabbi Yoshua says to Rabbi Eliezer, Yom Tov Yochiach. For 1 second, I can disprove your argument from Yom Tov. What about Yom Tov? She'tiru bo mishum melacha v'asu bo mishum shvus. That you're allowed to shecht an animal on Yom Tov to eat it, but you still wouldn't be able to bring it from outside of Tchum Shabbos. So we see that on Yom Tov, you have a precedent for D'Oraisas being permitted, but D'Rabbanans being asur. Amalei Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says to Rabbi Yoshua, Maza Yoshua, Maraya Rishus L'mitzvah. Or I guess Maraya Rishus L'mitzvah. Ki'ilu. Rabbi Eliezer responds to Rabbi Yoshua, he says, that's a terrible proof. I'm talking about something in the context of a mitzvah, and you're talking about Rishus, meaning when it comes to Yom Tov, so we're talking about bringing an animal from outside of Tchum Shabbos so that you can enjoy it on Yom Tov. I mean, that sounds very nice, but it's not like in the context of a mitzvah that needs to be done. So therefore, sure, while on Yom Tov you wouldn't be able to override bringing someone from outside of the Tchum. But in this case, where we're talking about a Korban Pesach, which is in the context of being able to do a mitzvah, that I'm bringing my Korban Pesach from outside the Tchum so I can bring it to the Beis HaMikdash and shecht it and have a Korban Pesach, so then I'll say that, well, if I can shecht the Korban Pesach, certainly I can bring it from outside the Tchum, which is only Midrabanan. Heishiv Rabbi Akiva. So now Rabbi Akiva gets involved, which is also interesting because Rabbi Akiva was a student of Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer, and also, as we're going to see in a minute, he calls Rabbi Eliezer Rebbe. Right, so we have machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua, and Rabbi Akiva now gets involved. V'Omer, and he said, Hazah tochiach. Well, let me, Rabbi Eliezer, prove you wrong from Hazah, that if you have a fellow who was a Tmei Meis, he became Tamei because he touched a dead body, and it's the 7th day of his Tumah, and it's also Erev Pesach, and it's also Shabbos. A lot going on this day. So, if we could give him his sprinkling of the mechatas, of the water mixed together with the ashes of the paraduma today, on Erev Pesach, that's Shabbos, well then tonight he'll be able to eat the Korban Pesach. However, if we don't sprinkle him with this mechatas, then he cannot eat the Korban Pesach. And we're saying that even though it's only a Shavuos, it's only Midrabanan, there's no Issur Midoraisa that you're doing by sprinkling a little bit of water on the fellow, but nonetheless you're not allowed to do it on Shabbos. So it's a Shavuos, and it's also on Shabbos, and it's also in the context of a mitzvah, so that he'll be able to eat the Korban Pesach that night. She mishum Shavuos, she mishum mitzvah, vi mishum Shavuos, ve'enu doches haShabbos. Af'ata al titamo, so therefore, Rabbi Eliezer, also don't be surprised, al elu, regarding these things, bringing the Korban Pesach from outside the Tchum, carrying it through Rishus Harabim, removing its warts. Sha'afal pishein mishum mitzvah, ve'en mishum Shavuos, lo yidchu es haShabbos. That even though it's in the context of a mitzvah, even though it's only also midrabanan, nonetheless, they will not be doche Shabbos. Amar Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says to Rabbi Akiva, Pum fakert, the opposite. Ve'aleh ani dan. Rabbi Akiva, I will argue that point as well. Umayim shchita shi mishum melacha doches haShabbos, hazah shi mishum Shavuos eino din shedoches haShabbos. I'm going to apply my same logic there as well. And I'm going to disagree with you and say that just like Shrita of the Korban Pesach is Docha Shabbos, well, certainly then Haza'ah, which is only a Shavus, it's only Midrabanan, and it's in the context of a mitzvah, of course it's going to be Docha. Of course it's going to be Docha Shabbos. Of course you're going to do the Haza'ah Shvi'i, right, the Haza'ah of the 7th day of Tmei Meis on Shabbos. Amr Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva responds to Rabbi Eliezer. Ochilaf, he says, you know what? Rabbi Eliezer, I want to make the opposite argument actually. And I want to say, actually, since we know that Hazah is not Docha Shabbos, right, that sprinkling of the Mechatas on the 7th day of Tumas Meis, when it's Erev Pesach and it's Shabbos, it will not be Docha Shabbos, says Rabbi Akiva, and therefore, I will make the opposite argument, which is, Ma'amazaya shi mishum shvus eina Docha Shabbos, if we're going to assume that sprinkling the Mechatas is not Docha Shabbos, well then Shchita shi mishum melacha eino din shelo tidches Shabbos. Well, says Rabbi Akiva, I'll take it so far as to say that since we know that Hazah is not Docha Shabbos, and that's only a Shvus, then certainly Shchita, which is an Am Melacha, should not be Docha Shabbos. You shouldn't even be able to shech the Korban Pesach on Shabbos. So Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Akiva, Karta Masha Kasav B'Torah. Rabbi Eliezer then says to Rabbi Akiva, what about the pasuk in the Torah? B'mo'ado bein b'chol bein b'Shabbos. That you offer the Korban Pesach b'mo'ado, at its proper time, whether it's the weekday, whether it's Shabbos. So Rabbi Akiva, how can you say that you're not going to shech the Korban Pesach on Shabbos? That's for sure that you're going to shech it on Shabbos. So Amar Rabbi Akiva, Amar lo Rebbe. So then Rabbi Akiva responds to Rabbi Eliezer, he says, Rebbe, my teacher, Haveli moed la'elu k'moed l'shchita. So Rabbi Akiva says, yes, you're right. There's a specific pasuk when it comes to shchita to say that you're allowed to do the shchita of the Korban Pesach on Shabbos. Meaning, according to Rabbi Akiva, he says, look, logically speaking, you should not be able to shech the Korban Pesach on Shabbos. You're not allowed to do Hazah on Shabbos, right? If you have a person who's the 7th day of his Tzumas Meis, you're not allowed to sprinkle the Mechatas on Shabbos. And that's only a Shvus, it's only Midrabanan. So then certainly, logically speaking, I should not be allowed to shech the Korban Pesach. However, we have a pasuk. The pasuk says, B'mo'ado, bein b'chol, bein b'Shabbos. We have a pasuk specifically saying that you're allowed to shech the Korban Pesach on Shabbos. But he says, bring me a pasuk to say that I could bring the Korban Pesach through Rosh Hashanah. Of course, Rabbi Akiva says that Tchum Shabbos is Takmi D'Oraisa, so maybe that wouldn't be a good proof for him, but that I can remove the warts. Bring me a pasuk for these, and then I'll say that it's allowed. But as long as you don't bring me a pasuk like we have for Shrita, well then I'm going to assume that they're not allowed. Kalam Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva says in general, Kol melacha she'efshar la'asos me'erev Shabbos, any melacha that you could have done from before Shabbos, eina doches Shabbos, will not be doches Shabbos. Shchita she'i efshar la'asos me'erev Shabbos doches Shabbos. Whereas shchita, that you're not allowed to so shchita, which you cannot do before Shabbos, so it's going to be doches Shabbos, right? So meaning, so the pasuk says that we're going to do the Korban Pesach on Shabbos, on its proper time, even if it's Shabbos, and therefore Shchita, you have to do, in the context of the Korban Pesach, on the 14th day of Nisan, so you do it even if it's even Docha Shabbos, but, removing its wart, let's say, you could have done from before Shabbos, so therefore, it's not going to be Docha Shabbos. Well, that was Daf Samachay of Masechta Pesachim. I think it was a pretty interesting Daf. What do you guys think? Well, let's go over it. What do we talk about? So washing the azara on Shabbos when it was Erev Pesach. So the Mishnah had said that the only difference between Shabbos and a weekday was that on Shabbos when they would wash the floors of the azara, the Chachamim were not happy that they were doing it. So the question is, who are these Chachamim? So first we said it's Rabbi Eliezer. So Rav Chizda says it's Rabbi Eliezer, whose opinion is that washing, that sweeping is also midoraisa, and therefore, if we're going to compare washing the floor to sweeping the floor, so then it would be also midoraisa, and you can't be over on doraisas in the Beis Hamikdash, only derabbanans. Whereas Rav Ashi says it could even be the Chachamim, because the Chacham, when they say, the Chacham will say that sweeping the floor is only midrabanan, so it'd be a shvus, but shvus is allowed in the Beis HaMikdash only in the context of avoda. In this case, the avoda was already done, and now there's just cleaning up the blood after the fact. Even the Chacham wouldn't be into that, says Rav Ashi. Rabbi Yehuda, we had the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, which is that you take a cup and you just, dip it into the pool of blood that's accumulated on the floor of the azara, and you throw that onto the mizbeach so that you can do zrikas adam even for the korbanos that their blood fell on the floor and got lost. And Rabbi Yehuda brought as a proof that from the fact that we plug up the azara so that the blood can pool and accumulate, why is that? It must be so you can take a cup of it and throw it on the mizbeach. To which the Chacham say, no, that's not why we plug up the azara. We plug it up because it's a shevach, it's a praise, it's amazing if there can be so much blood accumulating on the floor of the azara that the Kohen Mamash have to wade through it. Right? It's a shevach ula chacham that they should be ad akuboseim badam, up until their knees in blood. Oh my goodness gracious. Then we ask kashas, but what do you mean? Their clothing doesn't get dirty. So in the end, it turned out that there would be platforms that they would stand on, so that there could be pools of blood, but they would still be able to avoid getting dirty. Wow. Then we discussed, right, so we got to the new perek, the 6th perek of Elu Dvarim, and we talk about the Korban Pesach on Shabbos. Rabbi Eliezer's opinion is that not only is the shechita of the Korban Pesach Docha Shabbos, but also any dirabbanans associated with it, like such as bringing it from outside Tchum, or bringing it through Rosh Hashanah, which is dirabbanan, because Chaynu say it's atzmo. I think something that's alive carries itself, and removing its warts. So these are dirabbanans. So it says Rabbi Eliezer, even these things would be Docha Shabbos, as the Kal V'chomer, that certainly if shechita is Docha Shabbos, and that's Doraisa, well then these things which are dirabbanan would be Docha Shabbos. Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Akiva disagree, and they say that no, the shechita is Docha Shabbos, but any of these other things are not Docha Shabbos. Rabbi Akiva says, well, because you could have done these things yesterday, so there's no need to do it today, so it's not going to be Docha Shabbos. That was Daf Samachay. Hope you enjoyed. Have a great day. Peace out.